Sandosham to everybody. My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sivasankaran, Guru Piran New, fellow Jnanis. Um, I've been covering the last few satsangs on Mahan's Kundalini meditation technique. And I covered the technique itself, the importance of Mahan's 3 stages of initiation. And then I spoke about extensively on how this meditation has an impact on us, both uh, from a spiritual perspective, from a physiological perspective, that is, the structure of our brain goes through various transformation, and that has an impact on the health of the body. And I covered that, and you see that this great Mahan's teachings and the meditation method, when you couple the meditation method and the way of life in terms of the practice, the philosophy of this great master, we see that there are transformations that happens to us. And I'm going to continue this, summarize what we covered, and then push forward some of the things that we acquire that are very, very important knowledge for us to, uh, traverse this journey called life. So I'm going to take you through what we covered last few weeks, just to summarize, and then we move forward. So here it is, that Mahan's meditation technique, that if one has gone through this practice, you'll see that Mahan has got this unique Kundalini meditation technique, which is the first stage, where he shows how to raise the Kundalini force, and that has an impact on our mind. It helps our mind to be more focused. And I explained the last time how this practice uh, stimulates part of the brain, the frontal, cortex, and so on. And that's really important to stimulate growth of the gray matter, build a lot more the neurotransmitters, and you see that it helps in terms of focus and our intellectual growth. So this is practice for the first 2 weeks. And then in the second stage, Swamiji teaches how to bring it down, the descending step. And this is very important because it fires up the entire spinal cord. And you should know that spinal cord has a lot of neurotransmitters and electrical signals that pass through that from the brain to all parts of the body. So when that highway is, really functioning very well, you see that your brain, your body becomes healthy and rejuvenated. So you see that it's very important for the overall health and well-being of the body. And finally, after you practice this for about a week, 6 days, Swamiji shows how to bring that energy to the top eye, right up there. And that triggers some very important parts of the brain, and it releases important, what I call happy hormones, the hormones that gives us calming effect, peaceful effect, all these happy hormones that I've spoken about in the previous YouTube clips gives us a kind of a blissful kind of glimpses of the universal experience. And you feel the state of connectedness because the mind becomes more calmer and cooler, and you don't get agitated or impacted by our day-to-day things in our lives. So this is what, in the beginning, when you first start practicing, you'd feel that vibration. But as you intensify this meditation and carry it through not just the half an hour or 20 minutes, but bring that mindset to focus on that vibration, you see that throughout the day, the waking day, your mind becomes in a connected state. And I'm going to explain what that means. So this is what this great Mahan's teachings that you see, that he has documented this. And I've put it to practice for more than 45 years. And it has helped me in many ways. And I try to understand it. Being a scientist myself, I want to know why these practice, particularly this Mahan's practice, has an impact, and what does it do, and why does it do the things that it does. So it helped me to dwell deeper into this great Mahan's teachings to see whether if it is the effects are real, is the changes that are happening, are they real, or is it just a placebo effect? So over the many years of practicing, discovering, examining, putting it under a microscope, uh, there are some learnings that I acquired, and I want to share this great Mahan's teachings. So this is what this Mahan taught. And something very interesting that happens is actually this spiritual connectedness. As you practice this, your mind synchronizes. Instead of focusing on a lot of these material ups and downs, the sukha dukkha's, you see that, yes, in the early phase, the meditation can be challenging. Your mind gets distracted. But as you persevere, and I spoke about how one can persevere. So allocating a particular time for meditation is very important every day. It is a day that be in union with the divinity that is embedded in you. We interact with the world in many ways, but this is one interaction that you cannot afford not to do. And you have to allocate at least half an hour to an hour a day out of the 24 hours for this immersion into this divinity that nature has embedded in all of us. So if we allocate time for meditation, particularly what Mahan has shown intensively, introspecting, contemplating, reflecting, meditating, and taking this message in greater service to the community, you see that you get a sense of spiritual connectedness. You discover your spiritual compass, and you see that you then start dwelling into understanding the concept of God. You start going back to some of the scriptures and trying to understand and rationalize it. You start now relating to the spiritual realm in us. So three things. One is you try now to understand the concept of God, the universe, and the self, our place in this. And you see that you start slowly, as you do this, the connectedness helps us to slowly drop off the dogmatic belief systems, right? Most often people have secondary information or third party information, but they have not experienced this. But this Mahan's teachings gives you that knowledge, understanding, but also that experience. So something starts recalibrating in us that you see that our mind becomes more rational in its pursuit. It looks for reason and logic. It has to make sense because something is happening structurally in us to start connecting. The neural transmitters are starting to connect, and information is starting to come together, piece together. And sometimes you say, hey, this doesn't make sense. So how do I make sense of this? So this is what a rational thought starts, you start nurturing that kind of mindset. Similarly, you start looking at things in a more logical, in a more scientific, in a more evidence-based, experiential approach. And Mahan's meditation is an experiential practice. So slowly, you start discovering your own spiritual compass, your own direction. And that becomes the foundation of our character and our personality. And as we practice this, this becomes our guide. No matter what the changes in our lives, no matter what the challenges, no matter what the distraction, this compass guides us back to our path. Very similar to the GPS or the compass that we have. Sometimes we deviate our path. But when you look at the compass will show you this is the north. This is the true north that we should follow. So it helps us to recalibrate back. So I call the spiritual compass as our GPS system. This is the Jnanavalal Paranjoti system that is embedded in all of us. So as we practice this, you start getting that spiritual compass that gives us that bearing in our life. gives us that purpose in our life and gives us the direction in our lives. So, and this is really important at any stage of our lives. So it becomes the foundation, the fulcrum of our life that guides us. So this is the first thing that we acquire through this practice of this Mahan's teachings. Right? Now I want to show you there are 10 other capitals that we acquire through this practice. As I said, the spiritual connectedness, the spiritual compass is the first capital, or that wisdom, knowledge, or the wealth that we acquire. So when our mind, is able to connect to that spiritual connectedness that we have, the divinity in us, something happens structurally in our body, in our brain. Our brain becomes recalibrated. It doesn't get impacted by fleeting and transitory experiences, and things that are happening in our lives, challenges, the sukha dukkhas. For most people, it swings up and down, but now it becomes more kind of moderated and modulated. So when that happens, something very interesting happens is that our brain builds its horsepower. The brain's connectivity is so good that it's not distracted or wasting its energy on fleeting and transitory thought. You start getting that mental strength. Your brain becomes strong, your brain becomes nourished, and you see that the brain health improves. When the brain health improves, the body's health improves. So in the previous satsangs, I spoke about this in more detail. So the spiritual connectedness helps us to be physically strong, both from a brain perspective and from a body perspective. And this is very important for people who are aging. The body's growth grows up to 21, 22, mature, and then after that, it starts declining. And it rapidly starts declining after the age of 55, 60. Now, if you don't look after your body and if you don't look after your brain, it'll decline very quickly. So this is why the spiritual path is very important to give us a very strong brain health and body health. So we age gracefully. And when we do that, we start actually getting that confidence in us, the kind of infinite possibilities and potentialities, even though we may be 60s and 70s and 80s, that we're continuously active and searching, and the brain is continuously like any other muscles. If we don't use it, we will lose it. So this is what this Mahan's teachings and his I Got philosophy speaks about. With brain health comes our mental and emotional state. So when our brain is not healthy, when it's impacted by various, especially as we age, hormones change. The food we eat changes the way what we eat also impacts us. If we don't exercise, it also impacts us. You don't have to carry a lot of things, weights or things like that. Go for regular walks, do the stretches, do some yoga asanas. All these are simple things that one can do. So when the body's health is good, you see that our focus becomes better. Our mind becomes more stronger, and we start getting a very powerful mind, a mind that is so sharp, stable, and powerful. Nothing shakes it. So spiritual capital leads to the physical capital that leads to mental and helps us to balance and moderate and modulate our emotional state. This is really important because, as I spoke about in the previous satsang, most human beings are plagued by the 18 asuric qualities. The anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, all those things that impacts an ordinary person, that straitjackets them from really realizing their full potential. So now the focus and a powerful mind that keeps out these 18 asuric qualities, and when those 18 asuric qualities, is removed from our mind, automatically you'll see the 18 divine qualities that emerges: peace, calmness, compassion, all those things that I spoke about before. and your emotional state becomes really solid. Nothing perturbs you, right? The mind becomes really strong. So that focus and strong and powerful mindset gives us a fantastic balance of who we are and the confidence in us. The calmness and the coolness of the emotional state is really important for the intellectual growth, right? When our mind is calm and cool because of the health of the body and health of the brain, there is a sense of clarity of thought, right? We're able to focus and we're able to make sense of things. Our intellect grows, and things that you couldn't solve, you see that you get insights into solving, major challenges. So we see that the clarity of thought. So Mahan said, "Arivin arival arivin telivu," so that experiential practice leads to that telivu. Telivu is the clarity of thought. The clarity of thought is what leads to the intellectual growth. Our intellect grows. What does that mean? It means that we have that ability to discriminate between what is real and what is unreal. எது மெய்ப்பொருள், எது மாயைப்பொருள். What is temporary and what is eternal. What is fleeting, and what is permanent. So we're able to sift out what is the things that gives me peace and happiness, and what is it that agitates me. So you're able to sift out things. The intellect helps us to acquire this quality called viveka, the ability to discriminate between what is that which expands my mind and intellect, and what is it that shrinks our mind. So you can slowly keep out the things, that the 18 asuric qualities that makes the mind blunted, makes the mind shrunken, and makes the mind agitated. So you can slowly calm that down, and you see that it helps the mind expand deeper, more calmer, more cooler, and that helps the intellect, and that reinforces. So that intellectual growth is so important. That is why Mahan did not just teach meditation. He taught us how to introspect, contemplate, reflect. So if you refer to his Non-Kadal book or I God book, he spends a lot of time on, explaining nature, nature's forces that are embedded in us, and how to unlock those forces. And that requires a fair bit of intellectual sharpness and growth. And when one does that, when one builds that intellectual capital, that is why we see that in our Sabe, we have this discourse on Wednesday, we have the discourse on, the Katha Upanishads and the great teachings, and relating it to Mahan's teachings, and also looking at, these, knowledge in a more logical and scientific way, in a simple way, so that we can relate it to our day-to-day life. So that intellectual growth then leads us to this creativity and innovation, ability to introspect, contemplate, reflect, and touch the base of that quietude. And I want to explain this really well. You see, whenever people ask Swamiji, how do I achieve this? How do I get peace? He said, Unarva Gavani. He says, focus on that divine force in all of us. And that helps us to acquire this amazing quietude that unlocks that infinite possibility in us, that creativity in us. And I'm going to walk through with you that steps, that over the many years of practicing of this great Mahan's teachings, how I was able to discover what he was trying to say in a very simple way. So this is what the journey was. So I want to focus today on creativity. What is that? So when you practice meditation, you actually become very creative over time. So if you are a student, you do really well in your studies. You just, stand out. If you are a musician, the kind of composition that happens in your head, original composition happens. If you're a mathematician, you're able to discover amazing things, right? And this is what, and no matter who you are, what you are, if you're a gardener, you'd be able to, sculpt the trees and things in a fantastic way, so that if you are a chef, you'd be you know developing new recipes, and perhaps maybe have a show that is contributing to books and shows and all those things. So that creativity, no matter where you are, what you're doing, really is unlocked. If you are a person like a CEO, chief executive officer, I always say that when you practice this meditation, CEO has a different term for me. It is not chief executive officer, it is actually chief enlightenment officer. The E is a very big E, chief enlightenment officer. We become a chief enlightenment officer. When we do that, we're able to harness, we're able to have that executive power over everything that we do. Right? So if we don't have that enlightenment, the CEO, we will never be a good chief executive officer, because we will not have executive power to do whatever we want to do. So we are all CEO in our own ways, Chief Enlightenment Officer. We are responsible for our own enlightenment. The Guru can show us, guide us, but ultimately we are responsible for our own journey. So we are the CEO of ourselves. If we are CEO of ourselves, then we bring that to our family. We become the CEO of our families, and we nurture the next generation CEOs. If we are in a corporate world, we also permeate that CEO, Chief Enlightenment Officer quality. If we did that, I tell you, your corporate rise will be phenomenal. The same thing with social work and a whole host of things. So you see that this Mahan's teachings teaches us to really get fantastic, spectacular outcomes through this creativity and innovation. How does this happen, right? Let's define what creativity is. So for me, creativity is the expression of the mind. If the mind is amazingly creative, it expresses the beauty and the symphony of the mind. So if you are a musician, you are expressing your mind that is connected to the divine melody. If you are a poet, your mind expresses the beautiful words of this divine universe, and so on. So creativity is the expression of our mind. When the mind is unable to be creative, you see that it is very limited in expressing things. So for me, creativity is the expression of the mind. Whether you're a mathematician or a scientist or a philosopher or a musician or a poet or a cook or a chef, So what that is that creativity helps you to unlock that beauty. The expression comes in many, many forms. Diverse way. Nature itself is so beautiful. And you'll see later on, I'll speak about how nature has embedded the natural creativity in all of us. If we learn to focus on the self, ourselves, we're able to unlock it. So creativity is the expression of the mind. Now, what that is that if we understand that, then the question is that we need to understand the mind. So, the problem with most people is that they are so focused on other people's things and what other people are doing, but they don't focus on their own self or their own mind. So for me, I wanted to understand, what is this mind? What happens in the mind? And I realized something that, the mind expresses the world through the thoughts, our experiences through thoughts. So we need to understand why certain thoughts are there, how these thoughts are generated. And Mahan actually speaks about this very clearly in the I God book. So the mind is the place where thoughts emerge, sustain for a short while, and then it's dissolved. And another thought comes, dissolved. So these are all material thoughts that are a measure of experience of this material world. Some fantastic experiences, some not so fantastic experiences. Some people get so focused on that exuberance, others focus on the misery. Whatever it is, that is the expression of our mind and the state of that mind. So we see that actually the mind has a thought that starts, emerges, and then dissolves. Another one, waves go. So there's continuous flow of thoughts, right? And for an ordinary human being, the thoughts continuously flow, and most of the thoughts are material in nature, about a people, places, an event. Sometimes for some people, there are things that are not so great, not so, there are people that they don't like that are continuously percolating their mind, or there are good things that are continuously percolating the mind. So the mind is so preoccupied with these material thoughts until they go to sleep. Even in sleep, they are thinking about these things, right? So the mind is continuously busy with the material world. And you see that, and sometimes when they're so focused on a material thought, that's what they express, right? If it's something really negative, they express it in a very negative way. If it's very materialistic, the ego becomes very, very materialistic. So this mindset, so we need to understand the processes of our mind. And that's what the creativity helps us to decipher what is happening in the mind. And this is where Mahan's meditation method is so important. So we understand there's a flow of the emergence and dissolution of thoughts. And in that meditation, there are moments of quietude. So Mahan says, Unarva Gavani, when your mind is anchored on the vibration that is our Kundalini vibration, our life force, for a short moment we decouple from our material thoughts, our office, our partners, our family, our whatever. For a short moment, we have created something called an optional thought, a thought other than the material thought that torments us or that is continuously flowing in our mind. That optional thoughts, which is that vibration, that is the white space behind there, gives you that absence of the material thought. And that gives you that, the relief from the turbulence, and the gravity of desire disappears, and the ego too, the material ego disappears. So that meditation leads to gaps of quietude in our mind. For a short moment, we get it. For a short moment, right? We get that in the beginning. And then as we start practicing meditation, you see that gaps widen. A thought comes in, before just like a train of thoughts. So there's no gaps you see. But now you see that a thought comes in, before the next thought comes, there's a gap. And you see that gap starts widening until, so the key thing is that you're now observing what is happening. But you have to have the sharpness to observe. You can only do that if the mind is focused, right? So that gaps leads to that quietude. And over time, suddenly say, hey, there's no thoughts anymore. There's absence of thought. So we see just now that you get glimpses, and suddenly you start getting the glimpses of that gaps widening. And suddenly you feel a kind of a liberating feeling. That's what the true self is. As Swamiji says, Ennul nan arindeen. He says, I have experienced that nectar of that self, that big I. So that glimpses of, now you understand what that is. You get the glimpses of the creativity, the creator. And suddenly your mind becomes so creative. Suddenly you can make sense of things. Things that you did not understand, you start making sense. You get glimpses of that creator. You start asking questions, if God is infinity, if this divinity is transcendental to space and time, I must be created from that transcendental space, that creator which is transcendental space and time. Is that transcendentality is embedded in my DNA? In the early phase, you will not be able to understand that. Suddenly you start saying, if God is transcendental to space and time, that means that transcendental cause and effect or karma, then there must be I am created from that same DNA, so that DNA must be present in me. Suddenly, your mind becomes very creative and say, there must be something in me that is transcendental to this. So before the mind couldn't connect this, now the mind can do this. So is there a state that my mind is not touched by space and time, the transcendent? The answer is yes. In deep sleep, our material identity disappears. Space disappears. Time disappears. And when we reawaken back in our world, space and time comes back. But every day we go back to that state, right? So this, the mind does not recognize, but yet the mind says, I was in a state where I'm not aware of my body and my experiences, yet I was there. Suddenly you say, that means I was in a state where I was transcendental to that bodily experience. So can we replicate that while becoming aware? The answer is yes. This is where the meditation actually says slowly helps you to retreat and get to that state. So you get the absolute silent states where you become transcendental to your body-mind state. This is where you say, this makes sense. This is the eureka moment that we get. This is the eureka moment Mahan says, எட்டாத தத்பரத்தை எட்டி எட்டி உட்புறமாய் உற்று உற்று நோக்க நோக்க இப்பரமும் அப்பரமும் ஏக பராபரமும் என்னுள் நான் அறிந்தேன். He says that I tried to reach this abode. I attempted and attempted and attempted. I went within me and I realized what's within me and what's outside are the same. That gives me that reality of that true self. And this is what he is saying. And when you practice this, all of us go through this, whether you meditate or not, we all go to this state in our deep sleep. But meditation helps us to realize this state. So the glimpses of that expand, that creator, that the creative force expands. And if you know this and you practice this and you intensify this all your life, you start experiencing that infinite self, that infinite possibilities and potentiality. You see people who practice meditation, they're always calm and cool and smiling, but very, very sharp and universal in their outlook. Why? Because the mind is now immersed in that divinity in the self, that you see that they have that awesome creativity in them. So you see that, as I tell people, if you're a student or youth, when you practice this, whatever you do, you're able to achieve the highest achievement. If you are a professional, you'd achieve the best professional outcome. If you are a social worker, you'll achieve fantastic things. If you are a household or a family person, you'd be able to nurture a wonderful family. If you are running a corporation, you're able to lead that corporation in a direction that will achieve greatness. And similarly, as we journey through this life, we also, are able to lead a spectacular life because of this creativity. And when the time for us to drop the body, we are not afraid because we've achieved everything possible in this material world, like going back to sleep every day. We say, okay, time for me to pass on and move on to the next, go back to my original state. That's why we call it samadhi state, samadhi. So you will get that glimpses of that creativity, right? That infinite possibilities and potentialities. And when we come back to that through meditation and this continuous connectedness, I tell you, the mind becomes so creative. The mind starts asking and exploring and discovering. You never leave no stones unturned, right? You want to know why the ants, whenever they pass through, they connect. Why the moon is in this way? Why this? Why that? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? And all these questions. What is time? If you read Mahan's I God book, that's what his exploration was. And he wrote it in his own, I call the I God book is Mahan's manual. Right? And he's leaving that manual for us to now develop our own manual. So you ask a lot of questions. What is this? Why is this? Who is this? who is the animator of all these things. And that's what leads to creative thinking, not a dogmatic things that you believe other people's belief system, or somebody tells you what this is that you have not experienced it, but you just take it for granted. And that is what that creativity does, that deepens us to ask a lot of questions: why, how, when. And when we discover this, this is what our spiritual compass is telling us. This is the direction. We make sense of things. The viveka and the vairagya, which I didn't touch on, which is vairagya, is that we don't get overly caught up by things. We experience it, we live to outlive everything. And this is the beautiful part, that you don't run away from desire. You learn to divinize your desires, your aspirations and goals, ultimately achieving an enlightened life. So this is the glimpses of quietude. Over time, it expands and the true self is revealed to us. And this is where we get the awesome creative moments of the divinity. And the wonderful part is that as we go through this journey, that creator's creativity really becomes inspirational. It generates all the creative thoughts, and the explorer and the discoverer starts emerging from us. We start discovering and exploring new frontiers of experiences. We don't get caught up in our comfort zone. We're continuously learning. And that's what a Mahan is. A Mahan is someone who lives in Mahatana Nile, one who lives a life of greatness through discovery, through exploration, through learning, through expansion, wherever you are. And that's what this Mahan has taught me. And that's what leads to the universal mindset, that you go beyond your own limitations and you're beyond your own biology, that you discover many, many facets of this wonderful thing called life. And that's what the universal mindset that Mahan has been speaking about. But he coined that in the context of universal peace sanctuary, that sanctuary that is embedded in us, that has the DNA of the universe and the creator, that gives us a universal mindset, intellectual perspective, and also an enlightened way of life. And this is what that steps that I showed you earlier, that there's a stages of evolution and development that takes place in all of us. To summarize this creative capital is only takes place if we nurture that spiritual capital, that helps us to keep our brain and our body healthy. That's why Mahan says don't indulge in alcohol, smoking, habits that harms the brain and the body. When we keep it healthy, our emotional state improves, our intellectual state becomes more sharper, and that opens up the door to the creator's creativity. So to summarize, creativity is the expression of our mind. The mind is the place where our thoughts, starts, sustains, and dissolves. But between that thoughts, that quietude that we acquire through this meditation of this Mahan, through the introspection, contemplation, reflection, we get glimpses of that state where we are not impacted by the limited material experiences or material biology that the body is made out of. In that same context, our material ego is also dissolved. And over time, we get the glimpses of the true self, what Mahan calls the big I. And when the mind touches that nectar, the mind acquires that awesome creativity of the creator. And ultimately, that explorer and the discoverer unlocks the Mahan in all of us. And this is the journey that I want to share with you, that this great Mahan's teachings, both the meditation method and that I got philosophy, is simple, but if we put it to practice, it unlocks immense things. The next time I will talk about how this creative and innovativeness unlocks the natural capital, the capital that nature has that embedded in all of us. And how do we discover that our own natural talent and natural creativity? As I said, nature has not given everybody everything, but nature has given everybody something. And for us to discover that something, we have to take on a journey that helps us to understand this material reality, not get caught up by the material reality, learn to decouple from the material reality that distracts us, and more importantly, discover our own true natural self. And when we do that, you see that we're able to then unlock our own natural capital that nature's embedded in us. And this is what this great Mahan's teachings are. So next class, I'll talk about the natural capital. Sandosham.